Hello and a very warm welcome to all participants who have joined for this online training session organized by the National Institute of Social Defense, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment on the rights of transgender persons. The topic for today is the historical background to the development of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. Our Constitution secures the fundamental rights of all persons. Article 14 guarantees equality before the law and equal protection of the law. Article 19 ensures for all citizens freedom of speech and expression. Article 21 guarantees the right to live with dignity to all persons. Articles 15.1, 15.2 and 16.2 in express terms prohibit discrimination on the ground of sex. In 2019, the Election Commission of India allowed transgender persons to enroll as electors in the other category outside of male and female. For the first time in 2011, an attempt was made to estimate the number of transgender people through the national census. The census report shows that the total number of trans people in India is around 4.88 lakh, out of which 55,000 came from parents identifying their children as transgender in the age group of 0 to 6. Despite these measures, transgender persons continue to suffer discrimination and marginalization in society. In 2010, the United Nations Development Programme or UNDP India published a report titled Hijras, Transgender Women in India, HIV, Human Rights and Social Exclusion, which described the extent of socio-economic deprivation that the community was facing. An expert committee was formed by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment to understand the issues and concerns of transgender persons in August 2013. The National AIDS Control Organization of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare also introduced separate interventions for HIV prevention among transgender persons in view of their distinct needs and vulnerabilities. On 15th April 2014, the Honorable Supreme Court of India pronounced a historic judgment upholding the rights of transgender persons in the country. The case was National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India, which is a landmark decision which states that transgender persons must be treated equally and without any discrimination on the basis of their gender identity or expression. The judgment further says that apart from male and female gender identities, authorities must recognize a third gender and that transgender people have the right to self-identification of their gender as male, female or third gender. The Nalsa judgment, as it is called, protects the rights of persons who identify with the third gender as well as persons who want to transition from one gender identity to the other, that is, male to female or vice versa. The court directed the centre and state governments to grant legal recognition of gender identity, whether as female or male or third gender, without insistence on sex reassignment surgery. Further on, the centre and state governments have been directed to take proper measures to provide medical care to transgender persons in hospitals and also provide separate public toilets and other facilities. They have been directed to operate separate HIV serosurveillance measures for transgender people. The centre and state governments have been asked to provide social welfare measures and to treat transgender persons as a socially and economically backward class and extend reservation to them in educational institutions and for public appointments. The centre and state governments have been tasked with the responsibility to create public awareness so that transgender persons are treated with dignity and respect and not as social untouchables. Governments have been asked to seriously address the problems that transgender persons face, including fear, shame, gender dysphoria, social pressure, depression, suicidal tendencies, and social stigma. The court's directions have to inform the recommendations of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment's Expert Committee report. Since this report is quite broad in scope, this paves the way for incorporating many of its recommendations that aren't explicitly mentioned in the judgment. For example, the recommendation like setting up of crisis center and gender sensitization in institutional settings can be easily worked into legally enforceable mandates or rules. There is no legislation directly related to transgender persons in India. Primarily, transgender persons' brush with the law has been under the anti-begging and anti-sex work legislations, which criminalize their lives and livelihood. Combined with the prejudices of the enforcement agencies and the general apathy towards trans people, they struggle to access basic rights and legal processes and are disproportionately punished or victimized. According to the Kerala Transgender Policy Report of 2015, 52% of transgender persons were facing harassment from the police. Over 70% were not confident to face the police, and 89% reported being mistreated at the workplace. 28% have been sexually harassed or raped by partners within 1 year. 96% did not raise complaints against violence because of their gender identity. Sex work in India is governed under the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act 1956 or ITPA. Acts punishable under ITPA include brothel keeping, living off the earnings of sex work, procuring, inducing or detaining for prostitution. Penalties are higher where offences involve children under the age of 16 years or minors under the age of 18 years. Prostitution in areas notified by the police and near public places. The designated police officer enforcing the ITPA does not require a warrant to arrest or search. Under this law, trans women who rely on sex work for a living are picked up by the police if found to be soliciting in public places or when hotels are raided. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 consists of 9 chapters that address issues such as prohibition of discrimination, recognition of identity of transgender persons, healthcare, employment, welfare measures, obligation of establishments, setting up of a National Council for Transgender Persons, as well as offences and penalties. According to the Act, a transgender person means a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to that person at birth and includes trans man or trans woman, whether or not such person has undergone sex reassignment surgery or hormone therapy or laser therapy or such other therapy, person with intersex variations, gender queer, and person having such socio-cultural identities as Kinnar, Hijra, Aravani and Jyokta. This Act is in addition to existing laws which will continue to apply to all persons. It is hoped that the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 will provide certainty and clarity on how to address concerns of transgender persons and safeguard their rights and interests. It is pertinent to mention that the need of the hour is to generate awareness and understanding of the issues affecting transgender persons and the law among different stakeholders, which will ensure proper implementation of the Transgender Persons Act 2019 in the country. The major highlight of this act is that it prohibits discrimination against a transgender person, including denial of service or unfair treatment in relation to education, employment, healthcare, access to or enjoyment of goods, facilities, opportunities available to the public, the right to movement, the right to reside, rent or otherwise occupy property, opportunity to hold public or private office, access to a government or private establishment. The Act also secures right of residence. Every transgender person shall have a right to reside and be included in their household. If the immediate family is unable to take care of the transgender person, the person can seek placement in a rehabilitation center on the orders of a competent court. In employment, no government or private entity can discriminate against a transgender person in employment matters, including recruitment and promotion. Every establishment, whether government or private, is required to designate a person to be a complaints officer to deal with complaints in relation to the violation of the Act. Educational institutions funded or recognized by the relevant government shall provide inclusive education, sports and recreational facilities for transgender persons without discrimination. Healthcare. The government must take steps to provide health facilities to transgender persons, including separate HIV surveillance centers and gender affirmative procedures such as surgeries. The government shall review medical curriculum to address health issues of transgender persons and provide comprehensive medical insurance schemes for them. Certificate of identity for a transgender person. A transgender person may make an application to the district magistrate for a certificate of gender identity indicating their gender as transgender. A revised certificate may be secured if the individual undergoes surgery to change their gender as male or female. Welfare measures by the government. The Act states that the relevant government will take measures to ensure the full inclusion and participation of transgender persons in society. It must also take steps for protection and rehabilitation, vocational training and self-employment, and develop schemes that are transgender sensitive and promote their participation in cultural activities. Offences and penalties. The Act penalizes the following offences against transgender persons. First, forced or bonded labour excluding compulsory government service for public purposes. Second, denial of use of public places. Third, removal from household and village. Fourth, physical, sexual, verbal, emotional or economic abuse. Penalties for these offences vary between 6 months and 2 years and a fine. National Council for Transgender Persons or NCT. The NCT will consist of the Union Minister for Social Justice and Empowerment, who acts as the chairperson, the Minister of State for Social Justice and Empowerment, who acts as the vice chairperson, the Secretary of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, one representative from Ministries of Health, Home Affairs and Human Resources Development. Other members include representatives of the Niti Aayog and the National Human Rights Commission. State governments will also be represented. The Council will also consist of 5 members from the transgender community and 5 experts from non-government organizations. The Council will advise the central government as well as monitor the impact of policies, legislation and projects with respect to transgender persons. It will also redress the grievances of transgender persons.